Hello, hello. We'll be starting soon with the next episode of the live stream. I hope by now I got the sound properly set up, so hopefully you can hear me better than last time. I'll wait a few minutes for people to join, because it's much more fun to do this as a group exercise, basically. Hello, hello. Hi, Akonisos. Can someone give me feedback on the sound that also was there last time? Is it better than last time? Can you hear me clearly and loudly enough? Okay, good to hear. So I found out that I mainly used the microphone in the wrong direction. I spoke in there instead of in there. That was probably the main issue. But there's also more compression now to just make it louder. Hopefully it will not clip now. Still waiting for 1 minute, and then we'll get going. I'm experimenting with the timing right now, by the way, so I'll try different time slots. Although this time around, I think I only let people know about the timing. Good morning, Basilism. I only let people know about the timing in the newsletter, but completely failed to actually tweet about the schedule up front. So the schedule is shown on the homepage, and it will also always be set in the newsletter, but I'll try to also remember to tweet it out for people that are not reading the newsletter. Okay, so let's slowly get started. This time around, I wanted to work a bit on automation and mainly getting very basic testing going, and then using that testing to configure continuous integration system where every time we push code to a code repository, it will run through tests to let us know whether we broke something or not. And this can later be used also for continuous deployment. So basically what we want to have as an end result is to have our source repository for the project. Whenever we push code to it, it should run through an automated test setup. And when the push that we push to the version control system, when that was tagged as an actual release, we then want to have that release be deployed to a server under the condition that the tests pass. So for this to make sense, we need the tests in the first place and need to make sure that that we cannot just push broken versions of our website fully automatically to the production server. That's not something we want to build. I thought about what approach to take with both testing and the integration, and sorry for the cable. The standard setup is usually PHP unit coupled to Travis CI for PHP projects. That's the most popular option. So I wanted to use something else in this case, mainly for my own curiousness, but also just to see what else is out there, because PHP unit is often misused. It is focused on unit tests. It can be used for other things as well, but it is focused on unit tests, as the name already says. And the tests that we want to do, they cover the entire gamut from unit tests to functional tests to acceptance tests and so on. So we want to cover the entire spectrum. And although we can do that with PHP unit, it is just not the best fit. So what I wanted to use is Codeception. Codeception is built on top of PHP unit and provides a more generic framework for testing that covers all the different types of tests in a more direct way. And for the continuous integration, I wanted to go with Github Actions because I haven't played around with them much yet, and I think they're a very interesting addition to GitHub. So I will look into using Github Actions to run the tests. So that's probably what we'll end up doing for today: Codeception and GitHub Actions. All right. So for the I'm actually not sure whether the stream is still working. I have a frozen image here in my stream preview. Hopefully that's not the case for you out there. Let me just check what happens when I reload my Stream Manager. Okay, I have a moving image again, so that looks fine. So what I wanted to go through first is the onboarding experience with Codeception. It's been quite a long while since I last used it, because as I said, the most popular option is always PHP unit, so most projects end up using that. And I saw that the website has changed considerably since last time I used it. So we'll use their general onboarding just to see what that does for our initial first steps. And then we'll improvise from there. Which screen am I on? It is this one. So normally you should now see my terminal. I'll make the font a bit bigger. All right, that's looking good. Okay, so let's fetch the Codeception site as well. So that's codeception.com. And they have a quick start page. So we'll go through that. So what Codeception does is it adds different types of testing. And here, for example, it starts with the acceptance tests. And it has tools to generate these tests then. So here it generates an acceptance test and then acceptance test and fills it out. The test it does is very basic. It loads the homepage and makes sure that we can actually see the homepage. That sounds very silly, but that is the most basic, let's say, smoke test that you can do. So your site is not widescreening. That's what this test actually verifies. So let's go through this. First of all, we need to, of course, use the Codeception. Let's see, the Codeception development requirement. Oh, we're in the wrong project. Let me first switch to the correct project. That would be this one. So here we go. First of all, let's pull in Codeception as development requirement. It's finished twice already. That's always good. Let's see if we can have a third finish. So we're getting version 3.1. I don't know which version was the last one I used, but it was definitely not the 3 series. Probably something too early or so. Okay, we're getting a lot of external dependencies to make it all happen. As you can see, our WP starter setup is still working. So now we should have a new binary here in our vendor folder, which is apparently not the case. Yeah, because our vendor folder is actually in here. So that's where our vendor folder is. Because of WP starter, it moves the vendor folder into the WP content folder. The main reason for this is that the vendor folder might contain assets that you need to publicly get access to. And the main folder that has public access in WordPress installation is the WP content folder. So if the vendor folder would be outside of WP content in the root folder, if you would pull in a dependency that has assets that you need to access via the front end, like for example, if you pull in a plugin and that plugin needs to load a CSS file, that would not work if the vendor folder is somewhere that is not mapped to the front-facing web server setup. So that's why, by default, the vendor folder gets put into the WP content folder with WP starter. So we can see that the Codeception binary, it works. We have version 3.1.2, and we can see that we have lots of commands that we can run. The important one for now is probably this one, but we'll stick with the setup here. So let's split this up. Okay, it's not the init, but the bootstrap. So that's what we want to do next. We bootstrap our project. So what did it do? It created a Codeception file. It created a tests folder with some basic setup. It created a space for the unit tests, a space for the functional tests, and a space for the acceptance tests. And here, next steps, we should edit the acceptance suite with the URL of our application. And we can change PHP browser to WebDriver to enable browser testing. And we can enable the framework module. If we don't use a framework, that's not needed. So probably with WordPress, that's not needed immediately. Excuse me. But there's an integration for WordPress as well by Luca Tumedai, which will use, hopefully that still works. I assume that Luca is maintaining that, which gives us easy access to WordPress functionality. Then we're supposed to write our first test in the acceptance folder. So right now, if we do codecept run, it probably just gives us error messages. Yeah, wp content vendor bin codecept run. So if this is too annoying for you, we can for now just do something like this, because I know I'll mess it up all the time. So let's just simplify our lives by using a temporary alias for now. So what this does is it lets the shell know that we have a new known command called codecept, but that actually means this one. So now if we run codecept, we'll get the binary. So we don't always need to prepend the path. That's always, if you can save yourself trouble with remembering to type stuff with paths and so on, just use the shell with all the functionality it has. It can make you much more productive. So simple things as just setting up an alias for the next few hours of work to save you from always forgetting the path and always needing to type it out can actually make you much more productive and lets you focus on the important stuff. So we did the bootstrapping. Let's get back to what we're supposed to do now. We're supposed to edit tests / acceptance suite YAML to set the URL of our application. So let's do that. Here we can see the file that we are supposed to edit, and we can see that the URL is not the correct one, of course. And we need to adapt that. And our URL is this one. I think it should be this one. So let's leave the PHP browser for now. So basically the difference between the PHP browser and the WebDriver is that the PHP browser does a remote request via PHP to fetch the page from your web server, so it gets the HTML. And then you can run tests against that HTML, like looking for a specific markup, whether it's present or not. So if you want to verify that you got the actual page and it has the proper title and the proper post and so on, the PHP browser is just fine and it's much faster. The WebDriver works differently. It basically opens a browser, a headless browser instance in the background, and then navigates to your server's page, and then lets you query that page inside of the browser. So in there, you'll also have access to the client side of the web page, like everything that happens with JavaScript. So if you have a web page that is mainly built out of JavaScript, you'll need to test it in an actual browser, because the pure HTML markup doesn't tell you much about the page. So that's when you need the WebDriver. For now, we're happy with the markup, and as it runs faster, we'll stick with that. So for now, let's see what... well, we need to actually type the alias correct, because otherwise the alias doesn't work either. So we don't have errors. That's already a good thing. But we don't have any tests yet. What was the next step? We're supposed to edit this one to see for the framework module. Probably we won't need to do anything there. Yeah, so this is just fine for now. And then the next step is create your first acceptance test using codecept g_sest acceptance first. And here our overview lets us know the exact same thing. So that's what we're doing now. Probably we'll need to rename that later on. Yeah, the order of things is a bit switched up here between the quick start guide and the next steps, but that's fine. So now we're supposed to edit the first test that we created. So this is in here. But we'll open up PHP Storm now. So in PHP Storm, we can now see that our project, at the project level, we have a tests folder. And here you can see that we already have quite the infrastructure that Codecept has set up for you. We have our configuration files where we already added the URL here. And then we have the subfolders for the types, so for unit, for functional, and for acceptance. And then we have the support, which has helper functionality. So for example, for the acceptance test, the helper functionality, it contains asserts to assert that something is on the page, for example. And then we can ignore the generated folder. Here, the output and the data, you can see that some folders have this underscore. And basically everything that comes with an underscore, we can ignore for now. It's just how it's generally set up. Good morning, Xcoder. Good morning, WP Sofa. Hopefully you have nice tea for your sofa. For your sofa session. Now that we set that up, we added the first test that we generated. It's this one. So while we generated it, it created this basic scaffolding. We have a before section, so that's always the setup, and we have a try to test, which lets us configure what we want to test and how we want to test. So let's get back to our site, to our quick start guide. This is what they suggest using as a first test. So let's put this in here. We don't need the before for now. We should actually verify what happens on our site so that we can adapt the page for that. So we should have just another WordPress site in there. So that's a good thing to test for. And now rerun our test again, Codeception run. So our first test, front page works. It ran in 0.31 seconds. And what it did is it downloaded the home page, the front page, from our web server that we set up, and then verified that we can see that just another WordPress site is found in this. This is what the test will receive. And here it will find this, this piece of content. Well, it will be in two locations actually. This is in the meta, and it will also be, where is it? It will also be just here. So we could, for example, also make sure that it is in a p tag or something. But for now, this is enough, because this basically means that whatever we changed before we ran this test, we didn't completely break the site. So we didn't widescreen the site. So as a first smoke test, this is already brilliant, because we can rely on not having taken down the server, which is already a very important thing. Hi, Mind Mantra. Yes, I'm sorry for that. I set up a Google Calendar schedule, and I wrote the exact timing for the session in the newsletter, but I completely forgot to give people a heads up that didn't read the newsletter or saw this calendar. So next time I will, as soon as I know what the next session is, I will tweet it out again, as I did for the very first one. Sorry about that. This is already quite useful, and as you can see, it was pretty easy to achieve. It is really just download Codeception, go through the quick start guide, and you're good to go. What the quick start guide lets us know is that we should also try to run this with steps. So this gives us a better overview of what is actually happening. So now we can see for the scenario what it does, the individual steps. And I'll show you what happens when we do something that doesn't work. So I see dead people. Let's see whether that test works. And actually, it will let us know that it failed asserting that on page so-and-so that contains dead people. So that didn't work. So this is how a test failure will look like. So in this test, the step see dead people failed. Here we can see what the steps were, so that you can see what it did to reach the failing test. And what's also nice, because we have this saved output folder, it actually stores the result and the response. So if we open this, oh, that didn't work. Let's do it this way. If we open this, we have the actual HTML page that was rendered and that failed for the test. And if we open this one, oh, that was not the correct one. The response. Oh no, it's actually the same thing. I thought it would be the header information, but it's actually the same thing. So this will be stored in the output folder here. So it always keeps the things that were generated around, so that you can actually verify what has happened behind the scenes while the tests were running, and see what the reason might be. That helps you diagnose the problem. And here we can also see which ones failed. And if I remember correctly, that also allows you to just rerun the ones that failed instead of all tests. Let me see what that command would be. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, it's fine. So that would be that must be somewhere else then. I think there's some switch we can set to only run the failed test. We'll find that after a while. So that's not important for now. We only have one test, so it's not a big deal for now. So as you can see, using Codeception is pretty straightforward. And we have these generators here that now allow us to create the individual tests in a quick scaffolded way. A quick note about the different types of tests. So we have the unit tests, functional tests, and acceptance tests here in Codeception. These are 3 different types of tests, and they fulfill different purposes. And most importantly, they come with their own advantages and disadvantages. And it all boils down to how much work is it to create them and how much time does it take to run them. As you saw, the test that we did now to verify that our server is still working and that we actually got the page that we expected. If we would try to do that with a unit test, we will probably code for a month, because unit tests are very, very small in terms of their granularity. So they always test very minuscule, small details of a site. Whereas acceptance tests are at the other end of the spectrum. They test the big picture. And to know whether our server is online or offline, it is enough to test the big picture. We don't need to verify every single piece along the way. We just verify the end result. Do we still have our test online? Does it still contain the content that we expect? Yes, then we're all set. Unit tests, on the other hand, they test specific logic that we're building. And functional tests, they test the in-between, the integration of the logic with the bigger components. And usually when you build a test suite for a project, you can think of this as a testing pyramid. And this testing pyramid, at the top, you will have your acceptance tests. You will have a small amount of acceptance tests because they take a long time to run, especially once we switch this from PHP browser to the WebDriver. It will every time load the entire page in the browser. If you already know how long a page takes to load in the browser, you know that every single test will take a long time to execute. And also, depending on what the test is meant to do, maybe it navigates around the page, it clicks there, it fills out this form, it submits the form, etc. So it can actually happen that a single test scenario takes a minute or two just to complete. And if you would have 1,000 acceptance tests, well, you would never run that test suite because it would be an all-nighter. You just run it and get back the other morning. That's not a very useful test suite. A test suite should be as fast as possible to solve the problem it's meant to solve, namely give you confidence that you didn't break something when you made changes. It's all about that confidence, and that confidence doesn't mean 100% unit test coverage. It doesn't mean acceptance tests that cover every minuscule detail. It means that you have a reasonable spread of unit tests, functional tests, and acceptance tests that cover enough so that you feel confident that you're not missing anything important. So at this test pyramid, at the top, you'll have the acceptance tests. In the middle, you'll have the functional tests. They don't take as long to run, so you can write more of them. And at the bottom, you have the foundation, your unit tests. So basically, every building block you build with your PHP code, for example, every piece, every object you build should usually come with unit tests that make sure that this specific unit of code works as expected. The unit tests are very fast to run if you build them properly, if you don't build them like the WordPress unit tests. So they're not supposed to run the entire system. They're supposed to run only that one piece of code that you're testing. So they're very fast to execute, and you can have thousands of them that run in a matter of a minute. And then you have everything covered in terms of basics. This entire foundation of unit tests, it will mean that all the individual components already work as expected. So if you have a piece of logic that is meant to parse an email address, then you will create unit tests that tests all sorts of input you can give it and make sure that it always correctly parses this into emails or fails correctly if it's not an email. And then when you have a piece of code that uses emails, you don't need to test that piece of code with all variations of emails. You already know that if it uses this component for parsing emails, well, then the email parsing is already done. What you need to test then is whether it correctly passes it into that unit. That's where the functional tests come in. So it's basically the integration between the different units to make sure that they all communicate properly with each other. That's the functional tests. But you don't need as many of them because for the unit tests, you need to cover all the paths of the code. You need to cover not only the happy path, well, that's the path that's called, that's the path that is the one that produces the correct expected result. So when you have code to parse an email, the happy path would be that it returns a proper validated email. But there's also, you can also have the scenarios where that fails, where it throws an exception, where it changes the email into a sanitized form or whatsoever. So these need to be tested as well. And usually you want to test all the edge cases and all the limits of your logic. So the edge cases, it's usually, well, if we parse emails, then what happens if it doesn't have an asterisk in it? What happens if it's empty? What happens if it's not a string? That's the edge cases. And the limits. Hi, I'm Goldfriend. Yeah, sorry, I didn't give a proper heads up the few days before, but welcome. So the limits means that for something that works on a range of data, that you always want to have the minimum tested, the maximum tested, and so on. So it's important for unit tests to cover all the things that could have a specific reason to fail. It doesn't make sense to test the emails with 100 different first names, because if it works with one first name, there's not really a sane reason to assume that it could fail with one specific first name. But it could fail for some specific special characters, like the asterisk that has a special meaning for an email. Or if the domain doesn't contain a TLD, for example, that's the edge cases. So if we have the unit tests that cover all these edge cases, the functional tests don't need to cover any edge cases. They need to only cover the happy path and usually one failure to make sure that, for example, feedback of the failure also works as expected. And then the acceptance test, that's basically testing everything as a user would test it. So you actually use the end result. You go to the site, you click on the links, you fill out the forms, you upload images, and so on and so forth. That's the acceptance test. And they are all usually done one per use case. Sometimes you have multiple by use case if there's reason to also test the failure scenario. If you if you upload an image, for example, you should also test what happens when there's a failure with the upload. Does it properly get notified to the user? Does the feedback work? Can the user retry, and so on? That also needs to be tested. But for example, if there's a field to fill out the email address, you don't need to run an acceptance test for each type of email you could provide or so. That's covered by the unit test. We don't need that. I hope you can imagine this, visualize this pyramid with lots and lots of fast unit tests, a moderate amount of a bit slower functional tests, and the necessary minimum of the very slow acceptance tests. I should actually move in front of the camera if I use my hands. That would help instead of doing it off screen. So with Codeception, it covers these three different stages, and it allows you to run each of them in a different environment, for example, but still manage the entire test suite as a whole through one consistent system. So that's why Codeception is now, for all purposes, it's better than just use PHP unit. What you can do is you can use something like PHP unit and then Behat, for example, for the more high-level tests. So you use different systems. But with Codeception, everything is in one coherent package. You can see, for example, here at the bottom, it mentions Gherkin, and Gherkin is the syntax that Behat uses. So you can actually have the same syntax then with Behat in Codeception as well. By the way, let's just, out of curiosity, see whether there's already Gherkin steps defined. Oh, we need a suit. What are they called? They are called, we have a lot of stuff here now. The suit is probably acceptance. Let's try that. Yeah, okay. So we have exactly 0 steps that are already defined. We'll probably get to Gherkin syntax later, but just as a very quick introduction, Gherkin is a syntax for testing that goes away from a programming language. So where we have our functional test here that uses PHP code to run the test, a Gherkin test actually looks like proper English, and the main benefit of this is that you can hand over the actual tests to someone who's not a developer, and they can still let you know whether what you're testing makes sense or not. Oh, I see we're in the chat here. Let's move it the other side. So here's the Gherkin syntax. For a feature that we want to test, we create multiple scenarios, and the scenarios basically tell you in English, based on what the setup is. When we do this, then this should be the expected outcome, and that's basically it. That's the Gherkin syntax, and it works by letting you then define what these sentences actually mean. And over time, you'll get a sort of vocabulary that you reuse in all of the tests, so that you write tests in proper English language, everyone can read them, and you only need to deal with the implementation only once, and it then works across multiple tests. So that's basically how Gherkin works. Okay, let's go back to our code now. So now we have this basic test that lets us know whether our page still makes sense. And we should now try to set this up so that we can easily run these tests, and then set this up so that it gets run automatically when we run this in our continuous integration system, in our CI system, which will be GitHub Actions. So first of all, right now what we need to type is this: wp content vendor bin Codeception run steps, for example. Well, we don't necessarily need the steps. Usually you would run it like this. So this is what we need to type right now. We should first fix it again. So this is what we need to type to run our test. And what I usually do is I use Composer as my entry point for the project, and then hook everything up to Composer. And what I want to do is do Composer test to run out my test, because I already have Composer install to get set up, and then I want to be able to do Composer test to run the tests. And that's actually pretty easy to do with Composer. With Composer, you have this scripts section here, and these are basically hooks in Composer plugin space that you can use to react on something, but you can also just add scripts here. So we can add a script test that runs multiple commands, and one command would be, and now we have a bit of magic going on. We just use Codeception here, and that is not because of the alias we set up. It is because by default, Composer runs inside of its own vendor folder. So all of the binaries, well, it doesn't run inside of its vendor folder, but it puts the binary folder into its path before it executes. So everything that we have in here, it will automatically be available. And you can see, by the way, that we also have PHP unit here, because Codeception is based on top of PHP unit. It uses it. It uses also several other things, but PHP unit is one of the building blocks. So if we do this, it basically means that Composer then knows where to find Codeception, and we don't need to care about where we installed it. We don't need to know that it is installed in wp content /vendor or somewhere else. So if we now do this, our tests run. Hooking everything up to Composer means that whoever uses your project does not need to know about the internal structure, about where your folders are and how you set it up. It means that they have basic entry points to use to get going. Also, if you just run Composer, you will see that you will see that it already has, it adds them here. So, well, this is, I think, a default explanation, but you can, for example, do something like composer cheer, and then we'll have pony say, pony say, yeah, maybe not this one. Let's see what it does. Composer cheer. We have a pony that says yeah. And if we just run composer, we can see that we have our cheer command here. So everyone can even discover these commands. Hi, iTumbler. We're not using WP browser yet, but we will use it later. So right now we're not focused on building specific tests. We're focused on automating the tests away, so that once we get going with actually building the tests, they will always run no matter what we do. We'll concentrate on getting the one basic test that we have now, getting it hooked up to our CI system. And yes, indeed, with WordPress and its globals, that messes with all sorts of testing frameworks. Maybe that's a good opportunity to talk a bit about what the tests actually do. So when you have tests for your software, first of all, as I already said, it lets you feel confident about the changes that you're doing. So that's a very important point if you start refactoring your code later on, because something doesn't work as expected and you need to change it around or you fix bugs. You always want to make sure that you're not breaking more than you're fixing. That's why tests are so beneficial, because you can just go ahead and do as many changes as you want, knowing that the tests always have your back and let you know when something breaks. Without the tests, refactoring is actually very dangerous, because you can end up in a situation where you just refactored the heck out of your piece of code and you don't know what you changed. All hell breaks loose. You don't know why. And then you just scrap the entire thing, because you can't really get this entire mess to work again. And with tests, that's not a big deal. Sometimes you make changes that break every single test you have, but the tests actually let you know what is happening. And while you're working on fixing these one by one, you'll see that slowly you get back your code that works as expected, and you feel confident that when your tests are green, that your refactoring is just fine, even if you broke something in between. That's never a big problem. Also, what the tests actually do is, tests are very difficult to write when your code is rubbish. So the worse your code is, the harder it is to write tests. And that's why it's important to start with tests right from the start, because if you notice that you really have trouble writing a test for a piece of code, then the first step might be to refactor that piece of code, because it might just be very badly designed. And code that is very well designed tends to be very easy to test. So there's a direct correlation between ease of testing and quality of code. Quality meaning not how pretty it looks, because that's often what people think when especially in the WordPress space, when you talk about code quality. It's not about how you align the spaces, and so that's actually that doesn't do much at all. Code quality is about how you design your code so that things are properly decoupled, and so that when you have one requirements change, you need to make one change in your code to get that going, and that's it. So if you have bad code, if your requirements change, meaning that, I don't know, instead of having this piece of code in the right-click menu, now we want to have a separate button there. If you have bad code, well, you probably need to make 100 changes across 100 source files to make that work. And if you have good quality code, you will build a new version of that code and in one place change where it gets hooked into the system, and then you're good to go. And that means that that everything is properly decoupled and everything only has one single reason for change. That's very important in long-term maintenance of a project. And if you write a lot of tests, you tend to start building the code in a more decoupled way to just simplify your own life to write tests. Because if code is decoupled, it is very easy to test, especially for the unit tests. If you have an email parser object that is just self-contained, it gets a string as an input and gives you, for example, true or false, whether the email is valid or not, then that is very, very easy to unit test, and you only need to deal with that one component. There's no mocks that you need. You don't need to hack into some other subsystems, nothing at all. If you have your email parsing code in all sorts of places every time you need them, like you're in your template file, all of a sudden you check whether the form had a proper email or not, then probably to test whether emails work is almost impossible to get right, because you would need to test in lots of places. You need to load the entire system to test it, and so on and so forth. So good code is easy to test. If you find it very hard to test your code, the code might be the problem, not the tests. So that being said, let's go ahead and try to see what we need to get this automated now. We wanted to look into GitHub Actions to do this. And we should first look into the... so GitHub Actions is based on lots of ready-made building blocks that you then assemble together to do the actions that you need in your CI system. And you can also create your own building blocks, which are basically JavaScript pieces of code. I see some people feel the pain about testing in the chat. So first I wanted to check whether we actually have a ready-made Codeception action. As it turns out, we have. So let's see what that needs. We don't need a framework. We have an env file. So the Codeception action. Use it against a SHA. Okay, that doesn't tell us that much, but we'll just try to go with it. First, we'll go to the right repository. I think it should still be in here somewhere. Yeah. So the actions are active here. In the beginning, it was you need to have an invite for the beta, but by now I think it's publicly available for everyone, so that should work out for everyone to immediately work with that as well. I noticed that I'm on the wrong side of the screen again, so let's put it here. Maybe like this. So we should start with a PHP application with Composer. Set up this workflow. Let's just click through this. As you can see, the GitHub Actions, they reside in the .github folder in your repository. So the .github folder is a special place for the meta stuff for GitHub. That's also where you put your issue templates and pull request templates, for example. And the GitHub Actions, they also go in there, and they're basically YAML files and node packages. So let's see what we have here. PHP Composer on push. We build on Ubuntu latest with it. We first use a checkout. Then we validate our composer file. Then we install with prefer dist, no progress, no suggest. We could even add an optimizer here if we want. No, that's not the production. We're in the development space now. So, and here it tells us we need to add some testing stuff here and then run the tests. Well, basically we already took care of that because we have this nice composer test action. So that looks pretty straightforward so far. Add initial GitHub action to run tests. Let's see what that does. As I said, I haven't played around much with GitHub Actions so far, so this is also pretty new to me as well. We'll create this in a branch, add GA Actions testing. So this is what we're adding. Create pull requests. This is an enhancement. I haven't set up any labels or anything yet. This is very bare bones still. My priority in the beginning is to get all the moving pieces of automation going. Because once automation is in place, everything else is much more efficient to work on. Yeah, let's create a pull request. Now we'll see here, PHP Composer build, push in progress. Details. Let's see what that does. It installs everything for us now. And it failed. It didn't run the test suite. Excuse me. So now we can see what failed exactly. And we don't have a .env file because we need a database here and we don't have one. So that's basically the next step. Make sure we find out how to get a database going here and use the .env file to point our setup to it. But as you can already see, because we were using Composer and separate packages, getting our site here into the space where we can actually start automating it, it's extremely easy. You saw that was basically a few mouse clicks to get to this state. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to get acquainted with Composer if you're working on PHP projects, because it's just if you do anything else with PHP projects, you're really doing yourself a disservice. All right. Also, WP was not found. That means WP CLI is not installed in the Ubuntu installation. That's also something we need to take care of. So we need a database, we need a .env file, and we need WP CLI. That's the next few steps. All right. Let's get back. First of all, we can. I'll show you something. When you do a git pull here, we notice that there's not much. We didn't commit Codeception yet. We should do that. We'll add that also here to the pull request, as this is about testing. So that will all go into one. So first of all, let's stash this. Stashing means we're storing the changes. So now we don't have any changes in here. Oh, we have untracked files, right? That's not a big deal. So I don't know if you use GitHub a lot and if you try to work on pull requests to modify them after the fact and so on. It's actually pretty easy to do that if you have the hub client that I linked to last time. So basically you can just copy the URL from the pull request and check out that URL. And you'll see now we're in that branch of the pull request, and remote was set up if that was needed. Here it is not needed, but everything is good to go, basically. So first of all, git-apply, we want to actually push our changes that we have here. So we add everything and we commit at basic Codeception setup. And now we push. The first time you might need to push into the specific branch, depending on how your Git is set up, because otherwise you might push into some other branch, even though you have this one checked out. So the first time, always make sure, after you switch the branch, always make sure that you're pushing into the correct branch. After that, you can just do a git push and it works just fine. So now we saw that we added to this pull request, so that works fine. If we do refresh here, we can see that we have everything in here. Okay. And then we should find out how to use GitHub Actions for the database. And again, we'll use the very naive approach of just seeing if it can offer this out of the box, because you'll be surprised about how much of these things are just taken care of by an existing component. We have a MySQL database here. Let's try MySQL first. So, set up MySQL database. We have different providers here. This one has 11 stars. That looks like it does everything we need. It may be installed as the default MySQL. Okay, but that means we don't have control over that version. Root super user password is root and port is wallet. We can actually start with that. There's no point in having two MySQLs installed if this one works fine, but we should just remember that we don't control the version here of this one. This is controlled by the Ubuntu image that we're using. But usually with a given Ubuntu version, they wouldn't change the default MySQL version. They would only install security patches. So that should generally be fine, as long as we don't change the Ubuntu version ourselves. So that should be fine. So it would just mean that we need to actually create the database. So the database server is already set up. We have the data here is root on port 3306. That's the default port for MySQL. And we should then create a database inside of that database server with the setup that we need. And then we can probably just use that. All right. So let's try to figure out how we can best do that. Where's our... Here in .github. So in .github workflows, we have this php.yaml file. So composer, validate, composer, install, composer, test. First, we need to run our database. By the way, if you ever struggle with YAML, you're not alone. YAML is just an awful format. It tries to look simple, but it's really not. Set up, or let's do create database, run. That propose something like PCLI, MySQL. Well, we could actually use WPCLI for that, because yeah, it makes more sense to use WPCLI for that, because we deal with the .env file now, so that is properly set up, and then we install WPCLI, and WPCLI actually has a command called wpdb create that will then use the information in the .env file to create the database that we need. So I think that's a better way to go. So not manually create a database, but install WPCLI instead and then get going. How can we install WPCLI? Well, there's several methods that we can use, but probably for now, as long as that doesn't cause issues because of dependencies, we could do something like composer require def WPCLI db command. That's the one we need. What that does is it pulls in the db command only as a composer dependency, and then pulls in the dependencies of that command as well. So that would be the framework mostly. It might require other commands, but oftentimes it's just that command and then the framework. So instead of downloading the 5 megabytes of WPCLI binary, for example, we just pull in the individual commands that we need as development requirements, and then just use them with Composer. And that will be leaner, it will be faster, because not all commands are always then being initialized and so on. So let's see how far that can get us. Let's require that db command. The main issue you can hit with this is that you're always mingling all the dependencies of all the tools if you use Composer Def with pure PHP. So at some point you might have conflicts. Codeception might have a conflict with WPCLI, for example, and that has nothing to do with the project, but still breaks your project then. So that's why at a later point we might look into using not the source versions of all these tools, but rather including 4 versions of these tools. We also need the theme command, so that's actually also a good point. Require def theme command. Yes, we need the vendor prefix. There's probably some more that we need, but I'll WP require what? We'll probably need some more, but I'll just go through them one by one. It's always preferable to go from error to error and be sure that you need stuff than to that's not the theme command. That's actually the extension command. The extension command repository contains the theme command and the plugin command, because they both share a lot of code. That's why they're both in the extension command. So you extend WordPress with plugins and themes. That's the thinking behind it. So now it found something. By the way, for all of these commands, usually you should have version 2 something versions of the commands, because that's when the packaging was split up so that you can actually use the commands on their own as standalone packages. Before that, that will probably break. So now we can see that this already works, even though we had an error before. The main reason why we had an error before was when we initially set this up, it used the global WPCLI installation, which is not something we want. And when I then installed one WPCLI command, it meant that this as I told you that Composer always defaults to the bin folder it has in its vendor folder, this would then call WP content vendor bin WP. And that one didn't come with the theme command, it only had the db command. So it only pulled in the db command, the framework, the YAML parsing, and the CLI tooling. Now with the extension command, we got the extension command, and we also got Composer semver, semantic versioning. So now the theme command, it actually works, and if we do, I'll show you the difference between the two. So this is my global WP CLI install, and you can see that it comes with lots of commands. And this is the one I have now local for the project, and you can see that it comes with less commands. If we do skip packages, so the packages that are currently installed on my local system, it's even less. So we have CLI, this is always built in, this is part of the framework. We have the db command we have installed. We have help, this always comes in, built in as well as part of the framework. And then we have the plugin and the theme command. And that's it. And if you do a debug call, you can actually see what it loaded. And you can actually see that it only loads these few commands, and it took 0.25 seconds. And if we do the same for our global version, you can see that it loaded much more, and it's also taking longer. So there's a benefit to be had to do the stripped down version, because you only get what you need. There's less opportunity for something breaking that's unrelated, and it's faster, use less memory, and so on and so forth. And you can then also do the same thing with your own WP CLI custom commands that you build for your project, or that you have for your company or agency or whatever, and then always pull them in like that. And you don't need to pull in the entire WP CLI package, and you don't need to have WP CLI installed globally then. All right, so that's first change at WP CLI db and theme commands. So that is a needed change. By the way, this dash, we can drop it on this one, so that that gets removed. We still need to deal with the .env file. So right now, our code is already looking pretty good to be able to run the tests. However, you will notice now that we haven't set up the database yet, and setting up the database would actually be this. So name, setup database, run wpdb create. So that would actually be setting up the database. Let's push this. Set up database. And we have another run. So probably now we're being told that the credentials are missing. By the way, later we will set up a cache for Composer as well, so that it doesn't download it every single time here. So as we can see, we still have the problem with the .env file. In the path extension, unable to read environment file. And that's why the setup database is not even being triggered. So how do you set up an env file? Let's see whether we have something smart in here. By the way, I noticed that we get an exception in the loader. Share file is readable. We actually want to have regular environment variables. It might help to just let's see. It might make sense to do something like this for now. Name. Formatting here in YAML is just a pain. Name, create empty.env file, run touch.env. As you can see, if you know a bit of Linux commands, of Unix commands, POSIX environments, it's pretty easy to build something with GitHub Actions, or the same with Travis, basically, because it is just scripting in the end. Only instead of having the lines of script, you have steps that have a name as well, so that you know what you're doing, so that you know where it failed. But other than that, it is basic scripting. So that would hopefully get rid of this fatal error, because we don't want fatal errors here. We want failures, yes, but no fatal errors. Add empty.env file. And so the plan is, I hope that works as expected. The plan is to create the empty.env file so that we don't have the fatal error, but actually use proper server environment variables for credentials for the database. Where are we at? So that seemed to work. Now it's installing the dependencies again. I should immediately start looking into caching this. This is the thing that takes the most time. So we didn't have a fatal error. Error establishing a database connection. Oh, a WP theme activate. Yeah. So that we need to take that out there then. I didn't think about that. Because at that point, usually the database is not created yet. So we will do that as a separate step for now. We will look at how to integrate this properly later, but for now, we'll do this ASV3. And then we'll have, we'll change our composer file and remove this. So that was a bad idea from the get-go. That's why I had so much trouble with it. Okay. What we could do is do something like composer init or composer setup or so that contains everything we need. So that might make more sense. So we won't have it in a separate step, but because we want to still control stuff from here. Composer, what do we want to call it? Prepare, init, setup. What do you think is the best one? I often have something like prepare-tests, but it's a bit long, so maybe, yeah, no, let's do composer init. No, composer init is already exists, so that's not a good one. Composer, let's do composer prepare. So we're preparing the environment so that we can actually run something on it. Does that make sense to anyone, or is that a rubbish term? Yeah, no one complaining, so I assume it's good for now. So that would be WP theme activate ASV3 theme. That's actually what the theme is called. And then here we remove that again. That was composer prepare. Let's include this one as well. Composer prepare. Where do we have it? Here. WPDB create. Oh. All right. What did we change now? So we removed the theme activate. What is this? Yeah, removed the theme activate. Added the WPDB create and theme activate here in the prepare step. I think my coloring is off here. This is strange. And removed our pony, unfortunately. So that is looking good. Yes, iTumbler, indeed. That we can do lots of fine-tuning now. I'm basically trying to take the path of least resistance now to get to the automated stage, and then we'll work on fine-tuning, because we have limited time every time for each session. So I want to always solve the biggest problem first. So you're of course right, improving descriptions and so on is helpful, but it will not do much if the thing doesn't work. So move, prepare, remove preparation into separate composer script. Let's see what that does. Do we get an update here? Well, only for this one, okay. And the next round. So our validation failed, probably a comma somewhere, as always. Where did we have? Here. Git commit. No. Remove bad trailing comma. Oh, that was not trailing. All right. And the next iteration. So we'll trial and error our way through this thing to get this working. But isn't that always what we do as developers? Just trial and error until until we're in the green. So we're not failing immediately again, so all our commas are exactly where they're supposed to be. Okay, install dependencies didn't break, so that's already a good thing. So we're now in setup database. I think that was meant to be removed. Setup database. Okay, it's just prepare environment. So what is failing? Use of undefined constant db name. Yeah, that's why we don't have our environment variable. So that's why this fails. Now we had something here. Environment. Populates the environment context with all environments. Here I'm looking if there is one by Github Actions themselves. Can I filter here? No. The thing is, the environment variables, they will contain our credentials. So they could contain security relevant information like an API key or something. And with the GitHub Actions, what you need to be aware of is that each of these building blocks, it's code provided by a third party. So you're actually trusting your credentials to a third party. That's why using stuff that is verified by GitHub might be a good idea, at least for the security related pieces of your system. I don't find anything for now that is directly by GitHub. They have something for Python here. Well, that's for the path. That's not the same thing. Let's take a look at some of these. Yeah, this would be enough for the database for now, actually. We really don't need much more. And if we later get into more security relevant details, we can just reassess. What is this? This is the PHP version itself. That's not the same thing. There's an action provided by GitHub that does the same thing better. Yeah. What is it called? Why not provide a link then? That would have been helpful. Okay. Oh. GitHub environment. I would love to be able to filter. Here. Verification, only the verified ones. And verified. That's not great. No. So that doesn't help much. Let's just go with one for now. Maybe .env. No, that doesn't help. No, let's go with the basic one here. And env, no. Store env. No, which one was the very simplistic one? This one, yeah, that looks very simplistic. Let's just use that for now. So we check out the code. We touch the .env because we don't want to have the fatal error. And then And then we set up our DB host. That's localhost. DB name would be ASV3 or maybe ASV3 test. DB port equals 3306. DB user would be root. DB path would be root. Don't know whether I have typing errors here or not. Let's just find out. So we commit this, add DB credentials. So this adds these DB credentials not as a .env file, but as actual server environment variables. We also need to push. Let's reload and see what we have here. Yeah, I noticed that not only does GitHub have a lot of important actions already pre-built for important things, like, for example, if you want to create a release and upload it, there's just a ready-made action for that that's official from GitHub. So everything that covers the GitHub API is basically already taken care of. And then there's this marketplace where everyone that solves the problem with GitHub Actions has the opportunity to just upload it to the marketplace if they want and share it with the rest of the world. So there's actually a lot in there already. DB name is still not found. So create empty.env file. So it is in there, but it doesn't work. Let's try to find out why. Where's workflow context env map by default? Each subsequent step will have access to these variables through the env context. Oh, okay, that's not actually, or is it? Okay, that's not actually the server environment variables that I've put there. That's the GitHub action environment variables. So that is meant to be used inside of the other steps. So that doesn't do much for us. Now, let's get back to the drawing board. We actually need server environment variables. Yeah, I think the marketplace will now go through an initial phase where there's rapid growth, and they will probably need to rethink the discovery to make sense of the mess that that was created in the first place. So inside profile, any action that launches using we run in an environment that is based on it. Yeah. I could just set them, I guess. Global environment first, give me the subsequent steps. Yeah. Let's try this one. Let's see what that does. Looks promising. By the way, when I'm using GitHub, all these cryptic abbreviations that you see there, it's just aliases. So GS, for example, stands for Git status. GA stands for Git at all. GD stands for Git diff, and so on and so forth. We need to go into the right one here. Oh, we failed with YAML again. Ah, it's just the worst. Fix implementation. And again. So what do we have now? Anyway, Composer, GitHub. Oh, probably just something ready made already. Composer cache. No. GitHub Actions, Composer cache. Everything that makes us faster improves our productivity, efficiency, and ultimately results in better code. Ah, yeah. Why didn't it show that? Just cache. Yeah, okay. Example workflow. Implementations for PHP Composer. Yeah, as you can see, with GitHub Actions, most problems are already solved, actually. So that would be done here. Anything we need to set up here? Doesn't look like it. I think that's all variable based. Let's just quickly see what we had here. Use of undefined DB name, still the same problem. Okay, let's just first try to add caching, because then the rest will be faster. Add composer caching. Did I actually commit? Yeah. Add composer caching. I have to say, so far the experience with GitHub Actions is much more pleasurable than with Travis. Because with Travis, not only are you stuck with an empty YAML file without any of these actions and so to help you, it also seems much less responsive and more of a hassle to just go through iterations. So as you can see here, no, this one, this now downloaded everything, and hopefully for the next run, it will be cached. However, we still need to figure out what the problem is here with our environment files. But first of all, just to check our hypothesis here, let's rerun this to see if it's cached. Come on, Octocat, you can do it. No, not really. That still needs work. Maybe it's because I rerun it. Maybe it removes the cache then by default. I don't know. But we'll check that. So our environment variables are still not set up here. Override false. Did I copy that in there? No. DB name is not set. Which one is this? Alan Evans. What's it called? Setenv. Setenv. So that was this one. That looks like it should work. Let's try this step as well. That's of course not something you want to do in general, because it basically exposes your credentials, but we now need to figure out why this doesn't work first. Yeah, pushing it. Print n for verification. Git push. I think Composer is already faster, even though it doesn't say anything about caching. Yeah, print env. What did it? Well, that's useless. Why can't I open these? Let's try to reload. Ah, there you go. So this is my environment. We have all the information we need about the pull request. DB name is in there, but where's the rest? But here it's not in there anymore. Use of undefined constant DB name. So it could actually be that WP starter doesn't load them by default. Let me verify. I thought it should default to the server environment variables by default, but maybe that's not the case. This is I'll have to look at it and maybe change something else, but for now let's just make this work in a different way. So we won't use this. We will instead directly create a .env file here. So run. That will be touch.env echo db name equals ASV3 test. I should actually not have deleted them previously. Right. So echo into .env. Let's see what that does. So we're actually creating a .env file for now, because this, I assume that the problem is not with having the environment variables. I assume the problem is that the WP starter does only look for the files and not for the server environment variables, which does not seem like the best default, but maybe that's the case for a reason. I don't know. So create actual .env file. Let's see what that does. Oh, that's not how you spell create. I'm still wondering whether the cache is actually active or not. It seems faster than before, but it doesn't seem like it's cached, or at least the downloads are not cached. So what did we get now? Oh, come on. The WP config file is committed. So this one, oh no, it's not committed. Well, we can actually commit this one. It doesn't seem like it is. That might be the issue. Let me see. No, it's actually not committed. It will be created by WP starter though. So that should be the default WP config file. That's why it's not committed. It will be created by WP starter. Okay, so we would have, where's our action? By the way, what does this tab show us now? Yeah. So let's see if it actually stack trace, run composer, prepare. Let's do another step in between, namely where yeah. Let's do another step in between. Verify WPCLI environment. Run WPCLI info debug. Okay. Oh, there was something missing here. Show environment. That will show you what paths WPCLI uses and so on. Oh, we're slowly running out of time here. What? Oh, because it's, because we're not running this in the context of Composer, of course. So that needs to be this. Fix path to PCLI. No, I don't think that's, yeah, this one. Yeah, nice detail about GitHub Actions is that it can actually run a lot of things in parallel. That doesn't work at all with Travis. Travis is always within one run. It is always strictly linear. Here you can see, because GitHub has more information about what does what, that in the beginning it does run several actions at the same time. So here's our environment. Home runner work ASV3. So that's, don't know why that is in there twice, but probably not an issue. Okay, otherwise there's no errors here. Seems to be looking just fine. Maybe we can composer require dev wp cli config command. Just add a bit more debugging information to help us figure out what is going on here. So the other thing that we want to run is to use wp config command to just list the configuration that we have. That might give us some clues about what is happening. That will basically do this. It will show us the variables and so on and everything that's set up in the config file. All right, did I properly set it up? Yes, looks good. Add config list command. No, that's not the latest. Okay, so here we have DB host, charset, collate. That's default values. Yeah, and the rest is missing. But we should have a .env file, shouldn't we? Oh, it's the wrong format. That is really silly. That is because I just copy-pasted it from the YAML configuration. So the port would actually be in here. No, port one. No, nothing would be in here. Okay. Let's try this again. That was very silly. Fix .env syntax. So it would be nice if at one point we managed to just get access to a database. Why do we have to set up jobs? So now we have this in our config. So we created the .env file and our wp config from wp starter picks this up. So that's good. And then our prepare, of course it's db password, not db pass. Fix that as well. Yeah, I told you I have a very bad memory last time when I messed up everything. So usually I should look everything up like that. But I don't want to have the entire live stream end up being just me browsing around. I try to remember as best as I can, but oftentimes that fails. Fix db pass db password. No, that's not the correct command. So, but we're slowly getting there. Officially, this would be the end of the stream. I'll keep it going a few more minutes to hopefully get success on this. I think we're very close by now. The test suite will probably still fail because we don't have data in there yet. But if we already can get the connection going, then that is just a minor issue. Success database created. Okay. So what is needed is a WP core install. WP core install that needs a few parameters. Oh, actually, then our test might actually pass. So that would be where's a prepare? Composer prepare. Yeah. And composer prepare. WP core install URL equals 3.localhost title equals ASV3 admin user equals admin email equals my own, and that's basically it. And then add to core install step. So this will be the last try. Then I have to stop for today. Hopefully it will now pass. If not, it's only minor details that need to be fixed now, and I will do them for next time and then explain the exact steps that were needed still, so that you can properly follow with that. Let's see, PHP Composer. No, that's not the most recent one, this one. We're still failing. We don't have the core. Well, it will probably work after I've gone through everything. So I have to stop for today. Thank you all for joining. It was great fun stumbling through everything.